Jesse, if you are ready to go, you can take it away. I want to introduce Jesse Hardin from APHIS. He'll be discussing plant pest identification submissions.
Thanks, and I'm happy to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And be great if you just give me like a verbal acknowledgement that it is displaying correctly.
Time.
Yep, it does.
All right, thanks, Jay. Good afternoon, good morning to you wherever you are. I'm Jesse Hardin. I'm an assistant director at National Identification Services with Plant Protection and Quarantine. So I appreciate the invitation to speak here. This is maybe my first opportunity in over a year to wear a tie. Maybe we've learned to work in more comfortable clothes as we've been working from home, but I still appreciate that we've all accomplished a lot, and appreciate the opportunity to come tell you about some of that work we've been doing, including developing, deploying some new systems for APHIS PPQ, while we are continuing to provide safeguarding across the United States and territories. So for National Identification Services, we support the identifications of pests and diseases through the official confirmation process. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about why you would want to request official confirmation from APHIS PPQ and how you would go about doing that, as well as some changes that have taken place with the implementation of the ARM system. And so the reasons why you might request APHIS official confirmation of a pest or disease sample, there are several. The most notable would be if you're going to take official action, particularly federal action, or engage a federal response in response to a new detection of a pest or disease. It might happen in cases of changing quarantine boundaries. We would need to have official confirmation of pests or diseases from the new areas that would be put under quarantine. And so those are some of the reasons there. As well as any other first in the nation, first in state new pests, those would definitely be of interest to APHIS PPQ, so we can help determine what the response will be and how the states and the feds will collaborate together about that new pest. And so APHIS PPQ would want to confirm that identification. So anytime there's a first in nation or a first in a state, or unless quarantine boundaries would change within a state, PPQ might generally designate other confirmations that could happen if there's no official quarantine boundaries. So to begin with, you're looking at the submission of your pest or disease of interest. And in this case, we need to have some screening or preliminary identification done on samples. This is because we need to know enough about the sample to be able to route it correctly to our different labs, our different national specialists. So we need to know a little bit about the samples that are being submitted, and we need them to be initially identified by a competent diagnostician or identifier. We could recommend university or NPDN labs if there isn't a state lab available to do the screening or preliminary identification work. So I have the NPDN labs noted here as one of our resources, as well as those university experts or your state labs for that initial screening and preliminary identification process. And I just want to note that we, again, reemphasize that you should not submit unscreened or unknown samples for official confirmation, that you should try to have somebody perform an initial diagnostic of them before working with APHIS to get the official confirmation. We have a website that we use to help provide information to folks that is available if you web search for APHIS official confirmation. I've also put kind of a shortened link here, and you can copy that down as I'm speaking. That is like a web shortener service for government links. That'll take you to our website, and on the website we have instructions about the multiple steps for screening, sorting, contacting, and submitting those. The website has some older information about the systems that I'll be updating you on today. We're in the process of getting the website changed, and the changes have been submitted and should be up to date any day now. But if you have questions about the process overall for submission, our domestic diagnostic coordinator. Steve Bullington he works for me, and he's available to help assist you at any point along the way for official confirmation. So he can be one of those like first point of contacts for you to help you figure out if you're having questions about the submission process. So that's kind of the key takeaway here is we have a website that has the information, and one of the main steps there after you have an idea of what you're dealing with from screening or sorting and a preliminary identification, you can then contact the domestic diagnostic coordinator, which I'll call DDC, because we love our acronyms as we go through this. So what's changed? We have changed systems in a major way. The old system, the former system, agriculture quarantine activity systems, people called AQAS or ACAS. That's PPQ's system for tracking identifications and regulatory activities. That was retired in April. We sunset that system. Been around since 2006, so it was a rather old system. And our newer system for doing pest identifications and regulatory actions is ARM system. It's new in the sense that it's been around since 2014 for port of entry detections, where we do all the safeguarding at ports of entry. So it's used to tracking and handling 50, 60,000 records that come through the ports of entry from Customs and Border Protection and from our plant inspection station inspections. So we've moved to making this single database application now for all pest identification, and its glorious purpose is to capture that regulatory identification and the decisions, action decisions made by the agency. We really look at this transition as an opportunity, which is a word I've heard Julie used several times throughout the year of the circumstances we found ourselves in. So it's an opportunity to kind of modernize the submission process as we put it into a new system. And Christian alluded to other ARM development enhancements that have been ongoing as well. So it's been a very busy year for ARM. He talked a little bit about that in his talk about FIDOs and CBP exchange. So really we're asking ARM to do a lot more of our regulatory decision making and capture our identifications. What's really changed essentially is not a drastic amount. I mean, our ACAS is what I call it, was behind a firewall. So in the previous system, only PPQ could access that system. And so submissions needed to include PPQ to create an electronic record of submission. And that was, you know, in the previous process, that was done for most of our samples. There were some samples that were submitted without completion of the record until after identification, but still all your arthropods needed to be in ACAS before they were submitted. And so PPQ was creating those records. So ARM is changed to allow the level 2 e-authentication access. So it's not necessarily behind a firewall, but currently we only have access for PPQ individuals. We're working on trying to get that changed. So the future, we'd like to have the ability of people who have this authentication access, e-authentication, but at this current time, it still involves PPQ. So the submission needs to include PPQ to create an electronic record. And so there's not a lot of change there in terms of the practices, the business practices outside of the system. They still need help from PPQ. We do have a number of new users in PPQ getting trained and experienced with ARM that hadn't used it before. So we're still taking the opportunity to train and educate a lot of the user community as well. So let's break down what needs to happen for that submission process in order to get it into ARM and then to be able to submit it. I've got a diagram here that it looks confusing at first, and I'll kind of break it down step by step, starting with a submission request at the top row here. A diagnostic lab or a SPRO is submitting a sample. So let's zoom in on that a little bit. These first steps, the submitters would need to get in touch with their SPUD. That's the person to contact and coordinate with the SPUD, who in PPQ can help them to get the sample into ARM. The other record that people have often used for transferring information from the public to PPQ is the PPQ form 391. That form could still be used as a collection method. It's still an approved collection method. And the best way to kind of transfer the information about the sample from the lab to the SPUD is on that 391 form, so we can make sure we collect all the necessary information we need to get to help identify the sample, a specimen, as well as to make the right regulatory decisions about it. So all the other information about the collection can go on that 391 in an email to the SPUD. I recognize that the order here may be a little different. Sometimes the diagnostic lab is including the SPRO. Getting help from the SPRO saying, we've had a submission to our labs and we need help getting it identified, and the SPRO realizes this has significance, so they're sharing it with their SPUD. Sometimes it may be the SPRO is looking for a sample that they've been brought by the public or their stakeholder community, and then they need to go to the lab to get it to get that specimen processed, and then that lab could send the information to the SPUD. The main thing here is that we need to have good communication within the states between the SPROs and the SPUDs, but we all have great relationships to be able to share with them what we have going on, what we found in our traps, our surveys, and coming to us from the public. So the goal here is just loop in your SPUD about who they want to assist you in creation of this record in ARM. As I said, it's still a new system for many of our users, so we're working to get all of them educated on how to do the ARM record creation. So that SPUD is then going to work with their PPQ staff that have access to ARM to create the submission sample in ARM. And ARM will give back to us a routing receipt. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. That routing receipt tells you where to ship the sample and puts a preliminary ID on it so that we can get it routed properly. And then, so the SPRO or the diagnostics lab will receive back that routing receipt from the SPUD, telling them where to submit the sample, and it'll include with it the information about the sample in the record. Then the sample can be shipped to the diagnostic lab. So I want to show you a little bit about what this routing receipt looks like. Here's an example one. It's basically a PDF page. It has on it some key information for both us and PPQ to recognize the submission. Got an orange arrow here pointing to the diagnostic routing number, or the unique identifier number that's given to the sample. And I kind of got XXYY, that's information about the state location that's submitting it with a unique identifier number. It's got this cool 3D barcode, so that it's just kind of neat because you can scan that. And if you have access to ARM, it'll then pull up the record in your system. And so you can then work with it from there. Our labs can use that to more quickly and more accurately retrieve the record and put the processing on it. And then the other important piece of information is it's giving you back the location to send the samples back to, along with, say, a little bit of information. So in this example, this is a suspect sample for Phytophthora ramorum that's being sent in to the PPQ lab for confirmation. And so, this is just how we will be able to give you information about where to send the sample. And this should go with the samples being submitted because it contains the information that the lab needs in order to pull up the record and put the ID in the system when they have that done. So overall, what are you going to be submitting? You're going to be submitting your specimen. You're going to be, if you have that 391 form that you collected the information on, that's very useful to send to, just in case it has information that we need to help distinguish samples from each other. If you're submitting a batch of samples, that's always helpful to submit all the 391s, to submit this DR routing slip, diagnostic routing slip, to with the sample so that the lab can then pull up the record in the system. And it's useful to give us the information about the tracking, whatever your common carrier is. I'm not endorsing any particular common carrier, but these two generally used public carriers are the best ways to get it to our labs. So the tracking numbers from these carriers should be sent in an email along with any other information about the sample, again, to the diagnostic coordinator, and that'll help us let the labs know any additional information that's needed. So then once the results are completed, the diagnostic coordinator will help get the results back from NIS to the EDP programs that would be responding. So it'll be communicated through EDP. via the simultaneous notification protocols that we've worked out between plant board and PPQ over so many years. That notification will go back to the spud and the spro. Currently, this notification process is still occurring outside of ARM. And the future goal is to have this happen within ARM. And that will help us get the records back to people more quickly and efficiently. But again, we need to have our users able to retrieve those samples. So we're working on this still a little bit. We're rolling out this system and developing it, a little bit as we go. And that's one of our opportunities to make improvements there. So kind of in summary, just to cover it, what I've talked about before, we should always attempt a preliminary identification first, so that you know what the sample is and can tell us about it so we can get it routed to the right place. Having to reroute it to a different location is going to increase the amount of time it takes to get an ID done. So that's not ideal. And so you should always have a preliminary identification. Contact your spud early when you know you have a sample that you're going to be submitting to help coordinate who they want to create that record in ARM. The records need to be in ARM so that we can coordinate the official confirmation. And so that diagnostic routing slip or routing receipt is evidence of that. It's now in ARM and it'll tell you where you should be providing the samples to. That's step 5. Then you can ship and share that tracking information with us in NIS via the domestic diagnostic coordinator. So we can let the labs know, here's the shipment on its way so they can track it and they can be present to receive the shipment. And then ultimately the results will be shared from EDP with the spuds and spros simultaneously following those protocols. And that's basically, the overall summary of how to get official confirmation completed. I'm also available as well as the DDC. I want to give my contact information out there. I've been to a number of the regional plant board meetings and given a similar sort of version of this to some of the regional meetings. Very honored to be asked to give this at the national meeting. So you can reach out to me or the domestic diagnostic coordinator, and be happy to take questions.
Jesse, we have one question in the chat. It is, where do I find the PPQ form 391?
So the main place to get that, the most recent one is using this this official confirmation site. Will have a copy of the PDF version of that form. I've found that you can find it if you use a web search for PPQ, APHIS PPQ form 391, should pull up a good example on the APHIS website. There's a portion of the APHIS website that has forms, but this website does have in the steps in there, there's little drop downs to be able to complete 391. It's in there, so it's all on our website, and that's one place you can get the PDF. And that PDF is actually, if you get that fillable PDF, that's great, because then we can make sure, we want to get away from using handwritten PDFs as much as possible. So if you can use a computer to enter that information in a fillable PDF, that's great for us.
Very good. That's the only question that we have in chat right now. If there's any others, please add them to the chat.
If you want, I will drop that link shortener into the chat so people can jump straight to that site and peruse that site. And like I said, our website is being updated now, so it will have some references to the older system, but those will be replaced by the new ARM system.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jesse.